everybody. Welcome to Vibe Coding for Marketers 101. We're just going to give it a second to have any stragglers coming in. And then we can get started. Just to talk a little bit about myself while we're sitting here. I'm Kendall. I lead marketing here at Workzone. We're a pretty lean team over here at Workzone, and I found myself trying to talk about vibe coding with other marketers and how they could create assets really quickly. And I was finding out a lot of the people I talked to didn't know what I was talking about. So that's what spurred on this webinar today. We are going to go over what vibe coding is, and then what programs you can use to vibe code, and then we're going to build something live together. So for me, at least with vibe coding, it's given me back so much of my time. Things that might used to take about a month to turn around could now be turned around in a couple of days, where I might have had to hire like a design agency before. I can now do things myself. So at a startup, or if you're in a startup culture, that can be incredibly valuable, as you don't have that much time and you typically wear quite a lot of hats. So, all right, we're just going to give it one more second here. If anybody has any questions as we're going through, please feel free to drop them in the chat or in the questions box on your right-hand side there. This is part 1 of 2. So today we'll be talking about vibe coding. Next month we have a companion webinar to go with this about automating busy work for Claude Cowork. So how to automate reports you do every week, how to make sure you stay on top of everything. So that's happening next month, August 19th. So this is part 1, and that will be part 2. So, okay, we are going to get started here. To those of you that didn't hear while I was talking as everybody was coming in, I'm Kendall. I'm the marketing lead here at Workzone. We are a leaner team here at Workzone, so I have to wear a lot of hats, and I have a lot of initiatives that I need to get done sooner rather than later, right? Everybody always wants it sooner rather than later. I found that with vibe coding, I was able to create assets that looked beautiful and professional in a fraction of the time that I could have hired an agency or gone back and forth with a designer. And it's really that time part that I think is going to be the most valuable to a lot of people here. So I will say, of course, I'm a marketer. This is directed at marketers. However, you know, if you're a PMO on an operations team, if you're looking to build any sort of tool or asset, this can come in handy too. So you will get the deck at the end of this, and you will also get the prompt library. So don't feel pressured to sit and like take notes, or that you have to write super fast to make sure you get everything down. So everybody here will get everything we go over today. So no rush. I think as marketers, we know that, you know, we always have a ton of ideas and not enough time. And like the ceiling is never the ideas, it's always the time, right? Like I have so many ideas, so many things I would love to do that get put on the backlog that are going to be like a nice to have, or, you know, maybe it is important, but not as important as this other thing right now. And I find that's, with a lot of marketers, the biggest limiting factor. With vibe coding, so I wanted to just go in the basics of what it is versus what it isn't. So I think a lot of people, when they hear the word coding, it can be a little scary because you can think, okay, I'm not an engineer. how am I going to do this? Like, I can't code, and I want to let you guys know I also can't code, and I am not an engineer. And you don't need that skill set in order to create anything that we're going over today. So what vibe coding is, and there are a couple programs that help you get there. We'll go over some of them, but you explain what you want in plain English the way you would to your boss or a coworker, and AI builds it for you. So for example, say I have a campaign I'm running and I really want a landing page for that campaign. So I would go in something like Lovable and be like, build me a landing page for a campaign. You can be pretty general like that. It's better if you get more specific, but we will touch on that here in a second. Okay, you describe it and you get a finished asset. And I think that's really the highlight of what everything we're going to talk about today is that all those ideas that are sitting in your backlog, all those ideas that are sitting, you know, in your brain that would be amazing for your team and your company or your institution, they're all there. It's just the time, right? So the biggest benefit of this is the learning curve isn't very steep, so it's not very hard to get up and running. If you're already feeling like you're drowning in requests and tasks and everything feels like too much right now, this can also help you, because when you get things done faster, more things disappear off your to-do list, right? Okay, so when we start with describing it, like I said, I'm going to show you guys prompts and everything here shortly. Sometimes whatever you're using will get it right the first go. You're really lucky if that happens. Most of the time, I find that you have to do at least a little bit of refining, either based on messaging or copy or what you want it to look like. Maybe it interpreted one thing you said as another thing you said. It can also happen where you try to line everything out really well and it just kind of takes whatever that idea is and puts it on steroids, and it's not at all what you asked for, so you have to ask it to rein it back a little bit. But all of that feedback is still just going to be you talking to whatever AI tool you're going to choose. You're never going to have to do any sort of Python or coding. You don't have to be an engineer. I've taught a lot of the people that have onboarded here at Workzone from all different age ranges how to use Lovable, because we use it here at Workzone too. And everybody's, no matter what, pretty much able to get up and running almost immediately because that's how easy it is. So I'm gonna put a caveat in here just a little bit because yes, Lovable or whatever other tool you choose can get you there just based on what you type. So the caveat here is that it's gonna be really nice if you already have like your brand guide written out, your colors written out, your messaging written out. I have all of that. That is also going to be one of the prompts in the prompt library you guys are going to get to take home, is how to make your own brand compass in something like Lovable. But having that before you start this can make the process go even faster and a lot easier, and you'll find you don't have to refine as much on the back end. So it's really good to start with who the asset is for. So who are you targeting? Who do you want to read it? What's your ICP? What industries are they in? What you want the asset to be and what is on it or what it does. So is it going to be an ROI calculator? Is it going to be something like a landing page for a campaign? Is it going to be a competitor analysis table? What do you want it to look like? And then we'll go to the next one, which is look and feel, which is really what I always feel like makes it really come alive, which is usually putting things in your brand colors, in your style, whatever your brand is going to be. So, okay, So these are all programs I use or have used to do things like vibe coding. Lovable is going to be the main one we're talking about today. But I also use Claude very heavily. And we do have another webinar next month about utilizing Claude Cowork to eliminate busy work. It's the companion to this webinar, so we'll be going over that next month. I also use ChatGPT a little bit. And then for decks and graphics, I use things like Gamma and Ideogram, which I find a lot of people haven't heard of them before. Ideogram especially saves me a ton of time because I give it my assets and I give it exactly what I want in plain English, and it makes graphics for me. So you guys will get this slide on your deck. You can go click into any of these and kind of explore what they look like. Gamma especially can just build a deck in minutes and from a very small outline even, and it creates something typically very beautiful almost right off the bat. I will say for this deck, I did use Claude Design, but you would be able to make something like this in Gamma too. And Gamma is honestly a little easier than Claude Design to work for with this, because Gamma can be a lot more intuitive sometimes than Claude. But if you're making a lot of decks over and over again, I cannot recommend Gamma enough because it will save you so much time. So, okay, we're going to start to build here. I'm going to switch my screen. Okay. So I wanted to start out showing you guys what a fake brand guide would look like that you could start operating from before you even go into creating all of the landing pages in lead gen. This prompt will be in your prompt library, how to make this. But this is what I mean if you have everything together beforehand and creating a brand compass before you even go and build anything in Lovable. I can't recommend that enough because it'll save you a lot of time and effort. I give this to every new, well, Halcyon is a fake company, but ours looks similar to this. And this is what I hand to everybody new who comes at Workzone so they can get up to date on the brand and what we sound like, the before and after for channels, what a blog should sound like, everything like that. Something like this saves you a lot of time when you're onboarding, essentially, because you don't have to go over every piece individually. It's not in a million different places and a million different files in Google Drive. It's just all in one place. So this is the quote unquote brand we're going to be using today to design things. If you go to brand identity here, like I said, this mirrors the one I made for Workzone. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm designing things, I got so tired of going back and forth to find the hex codes and then like highlighting it, you know, control copy, control paste, whatever. So one of my favorite things that Lovable does is it can make things easily copyable. Sorry, can't talk. But I can just press this and it copies it immediately. So when you're designing something, even if you're hiring a designer or an agency, something like this saves like quite a lot of back and forth in a brand. And any kind of brand design, any kind of printed asset, anything like that. Okay, Patty, I do see your question about the free version versus subscribing. So Lovable does have a pretty generous free version. I would also say it's a very low investment monthly. So I think their starter tier is something like $25 a month, and it gets you quite a lot. So as far as like approving budget or things like that, that's a pretty easy sell. Most of these vibe coding AI platforms will have like a pretty extensive free trial or a pretty extensive free tier. because that's kind of the way they hook you, right? Where you go in, you use it for free, and then of course you want it after that because you can see like how much time and effort it saved you. So definitely go and explore all of the links when you guys get the deck. But as far as like a monthly investment goes, I would say Lovable especially is pretty low. You come here, voice and tone, messaging pillars, etc. All right, we're gonna go into our first build here. I have pre-built this prompt here for a interactive scorecard, an asset I could deliver after a webinar, use as a lead gen magnet, whatever I want. And this is where having the brand guide becomes really nice, because you'll see I can put all of the hex codes in right there. I also want to say, if you don't have the hex codes, you can describe the color, and it will usually get pretty close. So like a turquoise blue or whatever you want. Obviously, it might not be the exact hex code of your brand, but it'll get pretty close. So then we're going to come to just enter this prompt, and it will start thinking. And as we do that, I'm going to go and show you guys some of the other things that you could build while this is thinking. So this is the prompt library you guys will get after the webinar. So remember when I said it's really easy to copy things and make things so in Lovable, so it's just super easy. You don't even have to highlight anything. You can just come in here and press copy for all of these. You'll see the build a brand compass prompt is right here at the bottom. It does have that caveat in it that's make sure you get everything you need in order to give it the tone and voice and brand beforehand, because it'll just put you in a better place straight off of the bat. I will say I also used Claude Cowork to ingest a bunch of our sales data and sales calls. And that was initially how I created at least my first draft of our messaging and brand guide. So using Claude Cowork for something like that can also be really valuable, just really taking all of that data and giving you the best sort of analysis in the shortest amount of time. So, okay, we're coming here. We're still thinking. It does think for a hot minute, guys, but we did ask it to build something pretty in depth. So this is the other prompt we're going to submit at the same time, but I want you to look at the bottom here. And again, you'll get this after, so don't feel pressured that you have to write this down right now, but you'll notice I tell it exactly how I want it to talk. So I tell it I want it to be confident. I don't want it to feel rushed. I want it to feel personable and reassuring. And with a tone like this, I find that whatever your brand tone may be, putting it at the beginning really helps you get that first iteration going even faster. One of the things I think was surprising too when I started building this was I built out the brand guidelines for Workzone. Like I fleshed them out a lot while I was doing this, because I kept running into things where I was like, okay, well, for messaging, if I want to make 5 landing pages here, how do I make sure all 5 of them say and feel the exact same way? Of course, I could write it myself. It would take quite a lot longer, right? But when you have those brand guidelines down with your brand voice and everything, putting it in at the beginning saves you a lot of time. All right, we are still thinking here. I've talked a lot about assets that you can use on a marketing team to have lead gen come in, make dashboards, things like that. You can also do it for, I guess, quote unquote more personal things. So in May, I went out of office for 2 weeks. And I wanted to make sure who was covering me for those 2 weeks had everything they needed while I was gone, and everything was in one place, easy to find. So this was my out of office checklist that I made. I said all of the things that I wanted to happen while I was out. If there were files attached to a task I wanted done, I could attach it here. And when you click on this, it goes to the file. And you had the option to attach multiple files here as well. He could come through and just check off everything he wanted. And then at the top, one of the main things I wanted to do when I wanted him to do while I was out was really work on our May social schedule. So I designed this whole social calendar for him to post while I was out. So we come here, we can copy the caption and the hashtags. You can click on this and it just says download. It tells you what day it should be posted on, as well as the platform it should be posted on. And I had it divided by week 1 and week 2. So again, this isn't technically like a lead gen asset, right? But something like this made me feel really confident when I was out of office, that I could see everything that needed to be done, that he knew everything that needed to be done while I was out. And this was also built in Lovable. All right, we're still thinking. Let's give this second one a try here. One of the things I've started, this was the first iteration. I want to also say I didn't put the brand guidelines in this. This is why it doesn't work. It doesn't look like Workzone. And this is what it will kind of give you if you don't give it those brand guidelines. So I wanted a repository for all of the content we make here at Workzone. So sales and marketing could go in at any time and click on landing pages, one-pagers, graphics, whatever they were looking for. I did have the option here for like a login. I probably won't keep that, but let's see. It looks like we might be working. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted one place to put things. And I think that's one of the most valuable things for me about vibe coding is that with something like Confluence, right? Like, yes, you could put everything in there, but you would still have to organize it. You would still have to tell everybody where everything is supposed to go. With something like this, I would just be able to upload everything at one time, and then I could have Lovable organize it on the back end for me as well. So not only does it save me in, just raw assets that don't just go somewhere and die, basically, because I'm sure we've all made one pages that have just been used once and then gone somewhere to die. This really helps with something like that. So gives the content a lot more evergreen. Okay, so you'll see it's starting to generate the branding here. This one might be frozen, so we might give this one a try one more time. Or maybe we got it. Okay, yep. All right, so this was the first prompt that we did for an interactive scorecard. We gave it the brand guidelines. We put everything in here that we wanted. So you can go start the scorecard, and it built you out a whole quiz. Just come through here, 5 questions. And then this is a really, obviously there's programs like Typeform that can do this. Typeform obviously does have like a subscription cost that's monthly or yearly. So does Lovable, but it's less. And Typeform is also priced on like how many forms are submitted. you could attach a HubSpot form to this and it would just go directly to your HubSpot every single time, or whatever your CRM is. So whether it's Salesforce or Zoho or something else, we'll put my email in, and oh yes, work email. It was smart because of course we want business emails, right? So it already excluded the free emails, so that me and my team could have a better idea of who was contacting us. Okay, that was the first quiz. This, in my opinion, still needs a lot of work. I would like the back end here to have more of like a scorecard of like what you did, what you could do better, essentially based on your quiz result scores. I've built one like that at Workzone for an AI readiness score. And it's really, at least for me, for everything I do, I want people to be able to take away like a practical thing that can help them after everything I do, whether that's an email, whether that's a webinar, whether that's a landing page. Like, I feel like there's so much content fluff out in the world right now, and I can't tell you how many webinars I've attended where, you know, it's supposed to be about one thing and you get there and they don't even really go into the thing you attended for. It's just all very generic stuff you already knew. Everything I make at Workzone, that is not my goal, because especially now in the world of AI and how much content can be pushed out, you're really going to stand out now by creating things that feel and look human. And that doesn't necessarily mean not using AI tools, right? You know, if you have your brand guide, if you know the tone of voice you want your brand to be in, you're going to get something that's pretty close almost every time. I think people get discouraged or frustrated sometimes when they go to ChatGPT and they tell ChatGPT, okay, write me a nurture series email, or ChatGPT, write me a social post. And the thing about AI is that if you don't give it specific direction, it will give you the average of all things. And the average of all things is pretty boring and bland, or it sounds similar to everything else, right? I think we all know, you know, I think they're called Claudisms now, but also the phrases ChatGPT uses a lot, that you can tell when a lot of these things were written or made that it was just ChatGPT and maybe not a lot of thought went into it. You don't want any of your content to look like that. Like, nobody wants that. You don't want any of your dashboards to look like that either. If you decide to come in and make a dashboard, you don't want somebody to ever look at what you're doing and say, okay, that came directly from ChatGPT. Well, I think that's like everybody's worst nightmare, right? So, okay, we'll refresh this and see if it gives us the same. Still working. All right. I know I've been talking a lot. I'm just going to pause for any questions that any of you might have. Let's see. I can look at the chat too. Let's see. Okay. What do you do to keep things as, okay, I see. What do you do to keep things from exploding in cost? I know AI tokens can get out of hand quickly. What do you and your team do to make sure that doesn't happen? Okay, it's a really smart question. And I think this is a question that leadership will ask you too. You know, I'm sure we've all heard those horror stories where somebody just gave Claude complete access to auto reload, and I think they had a bill that was something like $5 million, which is insane, right? Can you imagine if you did that and you walked in the next day and your boss was like, why did you spend $5 million? It is really important to put guidelines on these prompts that you're doing. So we'll go over this a little bit more at our webinar next month, but I typically don't even build my prompts first in Lovable. I will go to ChatGPT or I will go to Claude and I will tell it what I want before I bring it into Lovable, because my Lovable tokens are technically more expensive than my Claude tokens at this point. So I could go back and forth. Obviously, it's going to eat tokens the whole time. And that's a really easy way to have exploding costs, right? You do obviously have the option to make sure like auto reload isn't on, but just really being intentional and thoughtful about your prompts, you usually won't run into that hard limit, depending on the complexity of what you're building. But for something like a landing page, especially if you use something else like ChatGPT or Claude to help with the prompt beforehand, you're never going to run into that token limit in a day. So here's another question. What do you use as a template in order to scale to several pages? That's a really good question. The foundation is the brand guidelines. Obviously, I can't scale anything if something looks different the whole time. I've been building a series of landing pages within Lovable and Claude Cowork. And what I have found is I will typically build the first page, first of all, and I will get it exactly how I want it. And then I will come back and I'll usually take it back into ChatGPT or Claude. I just want to show you guys really quick that you can publish these and make them live and share this link. And so this is usually the link I bring into Claude or Cowork, Claude Cowork or ChatGPT, so it can look at it. And I say, okay, I love this landing page. I want 5 other pages like it. I don't necessarily want it to be identical, but I want it to look similar. I still want each page to have its own kind of personality or voice, or if we're talking about different product solutions, talk about what that is. Once you build the first thing that you like, it is so much easier for you to just show whatever AI you're using, I love this, and it can build pretty consistently from there. It becomes a problem if you try to use something like the same prompt every time, which I know in theory sounds like it would work, but unfortunately, sometimes AIs hallucinate, and sometimes, so say I usually keep my prompts a little on the more vague side, of like, build me something modern. Okay, so when I put that in Lovable, if I use the same prompt in 2 different chat windows, each chat window will have a different idea of what modern means. That's kind of the tricky part sometimes with vibe coding. I've gotten to the point where I can at least explain what I mean by modern, but like I said, the best way I've found is to just build that first page exactly how you like it, and then have something like Claude or ChatGPT copy it from there. Okay, same here. So this is a toolkit page. You'll see it did. I know it thought for a long time. So a lot of times when I'm building things like this, I will put my prompt in, and then I will come back after like 10-ish, 15-ish minutes, because obviously you guys have seen it takes a long time to think. When you start here, to me, at least, this doesn't look as similar to that brand guide as I would like, right? So these don't necessarily look, in my opinion, like they're from the same brand. So either something was wrong with my prompt initially, or it started hallucinating while it was creating. So this is an instance where I would take this here and I would say, this doesn't look like my brand. Here's my brand guide. I want the toolkit to look more like this. So it will go, it will read that, and it will come back. If sometimes you might run into a problem with it reading, depending on what you're linking it to. So like, for example, it doesn't play super great with HubSpot. It can read HubSpot, but I even find that like the reading isn't necessarily accurate all the time. Sometimes the better path, instead of just dropping the link, is just pulling a screenshot. And that works for metrics, it works for visuals, it works for really whatever you want. Most LLMs have gotten very, very good at reading whatever's in an image. So I can just take screenshots of my metrics within HubSpot and drop them in Lovable. I will typically drop in Claude first again, and then come back to Lovable with my whole prompt built out, just to save on the costs and those tokens. But when I come back, that will build almost exactly what I want. So let's see, one more question. Are there any skills you've taught your AI that have been impactful to your workflow? Okay. Yes. With something like vibe coding, the best way to get a consistent result each time. I know I'm gonna sound like a broken record, guys, with this brand guideline, but I swear it makes a huge difference. So I have a skill built in Claude Cowork that says, before we craft anything ever, you're going to read our whole brand guideline. It does that before it does anything writing wise at all, brainstorming wise at all. By doing that, okay, you guys will see it just updated, and this does look quite a bit closer, right, to what we had our brand guide. And what, it was all of one sentence and a link. I do think this shows how powerful it can be, especially in reading that. But let me go back and finish the skills question before we continue on here. I also use it to kind of help me keep things on track. So skill-wise, I have it scrape like my transcripts from Fathom every day, as well as my Slack every day, to get any action items or feedback that I need to be taking care of that I might not have taken care of. I would say other skills. So I'm gonna go back to this brand guideline, because this right here is going to be your best friend when you're creating anything within AI. And I've already touched on guidelines a little bit here, but these are the brand rules that succinctly Claude checks every time before we do anything that's Workzone related. So it knows I don't want to see any M dashes. I personally love M dashes, but like I said, going back to people being able to tell if it's from ChatGPT or assume it's from ChatGPT, M dashes are just, especially in like social copy, you just don't want to see it there anymore. I learned this one pretty early. This is a pretty common sentence structure with both Claude and ChatGPT. There are times where I've made a whole skill that's just banned things. So banned words, banned phrases, banned anything that it also reads before I craft. Those are probably the biggest skills that have made a difference on my workflow. We can take a look here. I'm going to do the same prompt that we did here in this other quiz because I feel like it has the same issue, right? It just looks very bright and airy, and that's not really what we were going for. Okay, so there's one more question here. I might have missed it, but what are some tips to make sure your work isn't obvious that AI helped? Again, broken record here, brand guidelines. I think that's a huge problem. And when people get frustrated because AI just keeps giving them what is essentially like AI slop, right? Where it looks the same, it doesn't feel human. You can tell it's written by a robot. This is where that don't do list or banned list can come in really handy, because that will get you about half of the way there. The other half of the way there is basically the do this part, right? Which in here is, let's go back, voice and tone. This is where that comes in, right? When I write something, I don't want it to sound like stiff and formal and full of jargon. So I will tell whatever I'm making it with that I need something conversational, energetic. I need it to sound competent and confident. And I also typically, especially in the beginning, will give it a sample of other things that I've written. And that's the kind of voice that I like. So we have a newsletter at Workzone called Scope Creep on LinkedIn. And it has a little bit of a different voice than the Workzone brand I do for blogs or social. It incorporates a little bit of humor more and like dry humor. So when I'm making any sort of Scope Creep newsletter or anything to do with Scope Creep, I make sure to highlight, okay, these are some of the previous newsletters I've written. Do you see how I'm incorporating humor or statistics or whatever else you want to highlight there? Please look at this before you start crafting. I've also done that when it gets something wrong off the bat too, which is, you have my brand guidelines. Sometimes I joke that like all I do all day is fight with Claude, because there are times when, you know, Claude will hallucinate a lot, and it has my guidelines. It has all of those skills, and it'll still give me something just like bananas crazy. So that's typically when I pull in the references again, or I tell it to go reference. The way Claude Cowork is set up versus regular Claude is a little bit different, but for the most part, you can go tell it to check project knowledge, and that's where like all your things should live in Claude. But the do's and the don'ts are really what's going to get you to the point where your brand sounds like you and it doesn't sound like it was written by AI. Okay, we have a couple more questions coming in, but let's check this. Okay, so I gave it this same prompt as our other one. This still doesn't look like what I want, right? So either Lovable struggling a little bit today, my prompt wasn't clear enough, or it's just something I need to go back and revisit because this isn't this, right? So when something like this happens, I would be really specific and say, I want the darker sort of vibe that's present in the brand compass. This feels too light and airy and doesn't feel like the same brand. So we'll let it think about that for a minute. But I just want you guys to notice that at no point do I have to be super technical talking to Lovable here. I can tell it just what I want, and it's pretty intuitive for the most part of, of what you're looking for, especially when you have that brand guide fleshed out. So while it's thinking, there's a couple more questions in here. Okay. First, are these apps only good for creating websites from scratch, or is it possible to modify existing websites with them? Next, is it possible to vibe code accessibility features into your site? Okay, two questions here, and they have different answers. You can create a website from scratch with Lovable, yes, and it will be beautiful, and it might not be exactly what you want at the end of the day. And I'm gonna caveat this because despite how great Lovable is on the back end with SEO and how LLMs find things, it is not very friendly to that sort of thing. So what I have done, that's not to say you still can't use it to design a site though. So what I have done is I've designed something in Lovable and I have taken it into something like Claude and given it the code. And I have said, okay, this is what I designed. I love this. I need to take it into WordPress. How do I take this into WordPress? And it will walk you through the steps, or whatever your host is. If you're using Squarespace, or again, whatever your host is, you can ask it. And it will give you step-by-step directions on how to do that. So I basically use Lovable as a designer in that case, and not necessarily something to craft a whole site from beginning to end, because at least in its current iteration, you're going to get hit really hard on the rankings and the LLM, and so the AEO, and when you build a whole site on Lovable. You'll see when you start playing around with yourself, they have made some SEO improvements, and it will highlight on the screen sometimes, but it's still not there. So in those cases, I just use Lovable as a designer. It is possible to vibe code accessibility features into your site. I actually did an accessibility audit on Workzone's site and Workzone's app last week. And the first thing I had it do was just go through my site, and I just asked, can you tell me how accessible the site is? And it asked me what framework I want to follow. And there are a couple out there, and it'll ask you to specify which one so it can give you the right guidelines essentially. And it'll come back and it'll say, these are all the accessibility problems you have. Do you want me to suggest edits to make those accessibility problems go away? And you say yes. And I have found that most of the time, those edits are very small. Like they're typically just changing like one color a little bit, or just changing a layout a little bit. So it is one of those things where like a little goes a long way there. Let's see. On the other side of this, what do you not use vibe coding for? That is also a great question. Anything to do with money is the first thing. Do not give it access to any sort of sensitive data. As much as I love Lovable and as much as I love using it, they did have a huge security breach earlier this year where they had just published a bunch of sites and they weren't supposed to be published. So they have locked it down. It is a lot better now, but regardless, for anything like healthcare or banking or anything that takes payments, do not trust any AI is my best advice there. As far as other things I don't use it for, project management, obviously, you know, Workzone is a project management software company, but I could build a project management platform within Lovable, but a project management platform is only as useful as people use it. So I could give myself visibility, but nobody else would have it. So I also personally, just in general, I know personally sometimes people connect things like Lovable and ChatGPT and Claude to like finance stuff. Again, sensitive information, that isn't something I would use for it. So yeah, okay, let's see. All right, so you'll see this scorecard is a lot closer to the darker end of the vibe here. And we can go through it all and see what it looks like. So if I was going to continue editing this, I would give it another example because this still isn't what I want. So this is when I would bring those screenshots in, or I would start to get really, really, really specific because, to be fair, I didn't tell it this, that I wanted like a summary at the end, basically, of what to do. So I didn't tell it that in the last prompt, but this is when I would send it another quiz that I made that I liked, and it could copy from there. So, okay, let's see, another question. The last slide with the rules was super helpful. Is that option available in Claude? So yes. What's the best way to put this? Claude has a few things it can do in order to have rules. So you have skills and you have project instructions. If you're working holistically with a brand, it should live in a project. It'll just make your life a lot easier. But when you go into that project, it will have instructions. So my instructions for our Workzone brand in my project instructions do say no M dashes, here are my banned words, no jargon soup. And then I will typically also build a skill on top of it. And that might sound redundant, but you'll find in a lot of the LLMs that sometimes it will fire one or not the other, even if you tell it to fire both. It tries to run things from memory sometimes. So I basically use one or the other as a backup in case one of them doesn't fire. But like I said, you guys will get this and the prompt library. So you can copy something that looks exactly like this and tell Lovable what you want your brand to sound like. So you guys will get that too. So you'll see the do's and the don'ts also in there. Okay. With Claude, what's your primary version that you're using to complete these tasks? Fable 5, Opus 5, or lower? I like Fable 5, but if we're talking about tokens being expensive, Fable 5 is obviously going to be the most expensive, right? So I do tend to avoid using Fable 5. Opus 5 just came out last week. I am struggling personally a lot with it. It goes kind of back to that firing and not firing things. I have gates and skills that should be firing each time I'm doing something. And so one of those things is don't make things up, and it will still make things up. So Opus 4.8 was a lot better for me in that. So I'm still using Opus 4.8. I mostly use Opus. I think you can get a lot of this done with Sonnet too. At this point, I'm just the most comfy with Opus. And like I said, I do like Fable 5, but it's just not, I'll go through my usage in like a hot minute basically with Fable 5. So all right, I know we're running up on time. There are just a couple of more things that I wanted to go over, so I'm going to switch back here. Okay, so I showed you guys some of these already, but these are some of the other things that you can create that aren't just like landing pages. So sales playbooks, that's a huge one that's been really valuable for me, because when we get a new salesperson on, I can just send them the playbook and they can get up to speed a lot faster. I also made like a Workzone onboarding playbook for knowing where our ICP lives and our messaging pillars there as well, so that everybody who comes on can get up to speed much faster. Those are kind of the things I wouldn't have necessarily considered initially when I started vibe coding, but the amount of time it saves when you don't have to keep pointing people to a million different folders or answer a lot of the same questions. They can just pull it themselves in brand guidelines, playbooks, onboarding, what have you. Calculators and scorecards, also very nice for this. I've made a lot of quizzes on it. It does a great job at like weighting the quiz. And it integrates with HubSpot really well. So if you're already in HubSpot and you use HubSpot forms, super easy to insert a HubSpot form into Lovable. So this week, I want to encourage you guys to just pick one thing. Like, I know you guys all probably have a bunch in your backlog, and I know that things can feel really overwhelming on a small team. But just pick that one thing you've been thinking about for like a long time that would have been a nice to have. And just build it and see what happens and see how far you get, and nail down your own process, because there's a million different ways to use something like vibe coding or any LLM or AI. Just because I do it this way doesn't necessarily mean it will work exactly that way for you. You'll come to find your own sort of quirks that either Claude keeps running into with your brand or the way you ask questions, where you'll need to build your own rules in order to keep getting a consistent result. So you'll get the starter prompt library. I did kind of show you guys already what it looked like, but it does have that brand compass guide prompt in there for you. So you guys can build that this week if you want. Just put in your own brand guidelines, and or take something like a sales playbook. It will also have a sales playbook prompt in there. Those are the times that it can be really nice to have like those ICP docs built out in Lovable or somewhere else. So just go in and play, guys. Like, really, especially with how many free trials these companies offer and all of their free tiers, like, you're going to be able to build something that you'll like. Like, it's really difficult not to, in my opinion. So if you liked sitting in on this webinar, it has a sister webinar on August 19th. So we'll be going over Claude Cowork and how to automate essentially busy work tasks. So one of the things I automate with Cowork is I have an OKR dashboard I have to update every week. And I used to have it in a spreadsheet, and it used to take me about an hour to pull all of my metrics. And I hated doing it. So luckily, a lot of the things I use have MCPs, which is essentially a thing that connects something to Claude. So Claude Cowork pulls all of my numbers automatically on a schedule every week and updates that board for me. So that's the kind of stuff we'll be going over in our Claude Cowork webinar. Just really giving you guys more of your time back, because who wants to sit in front of a spreadsheet for an hour, so at least me, I don't. I know there's a lot of spreadsheet lovers out there. Sadly, I am not one of them. So we sadly don't have time for this, but at least live. However, if you guys want to drop some things here in the chat that you'd like to see built, I'd be happy to build it and reach out to you after the fact and just show you what I got, so you can kind of see yourself what your assets would look like. And we have 2 more minutes for any last minute questions. So let's take a look here. All right. Last question. how do I get my team on board with using a tool like this? A lot of my team is worried our jobs are going to be outsourced to AI. Okay, I get it, and I understand that fear that a lot of people have, and I think that's a lot of people who are resisting the change to just anything AI touches at all, and I understand that fear. However, this is my counterpoint, which is that for as long as content or anything else marketing related existed, there were always terrible versions of it. There have been people making terrible design and terrible content for as long as marketing has been around. That doesn't change with AI. They just make that terrible content faster. So if you can have a voice, sound human, put those guidelines in, your content is not going to be like AI slop. It's not. And I think the best way to frame this to your team is the person that's able to do the job of 5 people becomes a lot more irreplaceable than a person that just does one job. So, like I said, we're a lean team here at Workzone. I wear a lot of hats. I am the marketing leader. I do all the campaigns, all the strategies. I build all the landing pages. Like, technically, like, my team does the work of probably 10 different positions. And if I could hire somebody tomorrow, I would pick somebody that could also do the job of 3 people, because in this day and age, with how fast AI is pushing things, like, that's where you become the most valuable. So, like, frame it to your team more in a way that's talking about how you can upskill and level up and really move things along faster versus I don't want AI to take my job. So as always, feel free to reach out to me at Kendall at Workzone. You guys will get a recording of this and all of the assets shortly. And thank you so much for coming. I'm so happy to see all the questions here. There were a lot of really great questions. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email if you have any questions about vibe coding or anything else AI related. Just let me know. So have a great day, guys.